It all started with a Zoom call. At least, I only became aware it was happening because of a Zoom call. For all I know, it could have been happening for much longer, but the day of the second post-lockdown work meeting was the first time I noticed it. We're in the middle of a pretty tedious brainstorming session with a few members of marketing when a coworker interrupts whoever's talking to address me by name. It actually made me jump at first. I was totally tuned out, so hearing my name brought me right back around again. I respond, "Huh? Yep, I was listening." When I notice the person who addressed me is now closely studying their own laptop screen. "I don't mean to alarm you," they said, "but I think someone's watching you through the window behind you." I know exactly which window he's talking about, so I turn, a bit nervous at the idea of discovering he's right, only to see that there's no one there. I'm more relieved than anything, to be honest. I figured he was playing a joke on me because he clocked that I was nodding off during the meeting, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't maybe deserve it a little bit. "Very funny," I said, and a few of the other callers had a little titter at the impromptu prank. "I'm sorry, but I wasn't joking," the guy said. "Did no one else see that? I'm so sure." You're probably just seeing things," someone else chimed in, and within a few minutes, the whole thing was completely forgotten. A smudge on the screen, a bit of lag on the call, eyes playing tricks. There were 100 ways to explain it. The truth was literally unthinkable at that stage. A short while later, the exact same thing happens. The same guy interrupts, only far more urgently this time, saying, Look, it's right there. I'm not imagining it. You can all see that, yeah?" I know what he's talking about, only I don't turn around immediately. I look at my own webcam feed to see what he was talking about, and right when I see it, what's clearly the silhouette of a head in the window behind me, I hear one of the other callers say "Oh, wow, I see it too." I spin around just in time to catch the quick blur of whoever was watching me, ducking out of view. I'm actually really creeped out at this point because it obviously wasn't just somebody walking past my ground floor bedroom. Someone had actually stopped to stare inside. My window isn't even facing the street. It's at the side of the apartment block, like you have to actually go out of your way to find it. Now, I'm only 5'3" and I'm 8 stone, which for any Americans reading this means I'm tiny. And I had to make sure if someone was actually creeping on me, they weren't just hiding out and waiting until I was vulnerable. So, phone in one hand, kitchen knife in the other, I tell the Zoom call that I'll be right back and then head out to make sure that everything is kosher. It's peak lockdown during all of this, so the streets are pretty much deserted, so I'd think I'd have noticed anyone wandering around. But there was no one, not a soul in sight. So I guessed, or rather hoped, that it was just some neighbor kids messing around, maybe looking for a wayward ball or something. About a week goes by and the whole window face incident has been at the back of my mind the whole time. For a lot of young women who live alone, the idea of being targeted where we're most vulnerable is frankly terrifying. So the prospect of that nightmare coming to life just didn't bear thinking about. I'm not saying I was on edge the whole time or that I lose sleep over it or anything, but let's just say I held my keys a little tighter in my fists whenever I walk down the street my apartment block is on. But anyway, at one point I head out to the grocery store to pick up food, and I ended up caught in one of those super long COVID lines that you're stuck in for like 40 minutes before you're allowed into the store to buy your stuff. This is on top of the fact that the store near me had implemented this dumb one-way system in the aisles in an attempt to stop the spread. My point is, a trip that would have normally taken like half hour ends up taking more like 90 minutes, and an annoying amount of my day has been completely wasted. So I'm already in a bad mood by the time I get back to my apartment, only to find that the front door has been bashed in. Apparently, there had been a break-in while I was out. If only criminals could work from home. It seemed obvious that it was a burglary at first. All my stuff had been strewn around, drawers and cabinets were opened and emptied. The TV was still there, along with my PlayStation, but most break-ins just go for jewelry and phones, I heard. Anything small that they can pawn easily. Obviously, I called the cops like there and then, who arrived within a half hour or so. They advised me to help them look around the apartment for anything that might be missing, valuable electronics and whatnot, but I told them I already looked and that nothing obvious seemed to have been taken. My bedroom looked like it had been hit by a bomb. Clothes had been strewn all over the place. Whole drawers had been pulled out and flipped, like whoever broke in was looking for something. One of the cops spent some time looking around in there before he called out to his partner. "Hey, we need forensics up in here," is what he actually said. I asked him what the deal was, if he'd found something that I should know about. Both cops had been warm, friendly, and helpful up until that point, but when I asked him why forensics was needed, one of them told me not to worry about it and to stay out of my bedroom for the time being. It was no big deal at first. I was just grateful that they showed up so fast, even if they did wear masks and insist on keeping 6 feet between us at all times. So by the time forensics team showed up, I'm out front of my apartment building talking to my mom on the phone. Only when I see what they're actually doing in my apartment, it triggers what I can only describe as a mini freakout. Guys in gloves and white coverall suits have been scooping big handfuls of my underwear into bags, sealing them, then taking them out to their truck outside. And then it dawns on me. Whoever broke into my apartment had left DNA on my underwear. Now, I probably don't need to tell you how exactly they'd done that. The whole thing grosses me out too much for me to actually type it. But the thing that really got to me was, if I'd actually been home that afternoon, there's no telling what would have happened if some violent perv had actually gotten their dirty hands on me. But anyway, the story does actually have something of a resolution and thankfully a happy ending, because they had this guy's DNA. Police were able to match it on their database with a guy who'd had multiple run-ins with the law for public exposure, among other things. He was arrested, and he's now looking at 3 years in prison for aggravated burglary, some kind of charge like that. But the whole thing came full circle for me in an interview with some detective who'd mentioned that this guy liked casing his victims' places before he struck. "Over the past month or so, have you seen anyone hanging around your apartment who doesn't live there, maybe someone looking through your window?" He said it. He literally said it. It was him, that day when I was in the Zoom call. It was him that had been looking through my window. He'd been stalking me for God knows how long, and when it came for him to actually get me, only by the grace of God was I lucky enough to have been out grocery shopping. Otherwise, it doesn't bear thinking about what might have happened. I've been hugely into online gaming for as long as I can remember. As many others might testify, beating your friends on split-screen Mario Kart was fun, but beating some faceless stranger on Age of Empires 2 was a legit rush. Like I always imagined it was some super smart older kid getting their butt handed to them by me, the 10-year-old tactical genius, and the whole thing kicked off a love affair with online games that stayed strong ever since. For the past 8 years or so, my game of choice has been Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Being a sweaty FPS veteran, I played the first game a whole bunch and was super excited to get to grips with its successor. When I got my hands on it, I was hooked. And over the years, I moved from clan to clan, playing with an ever-shifting international group of people until I settled on the clan I'm in now. It's run by this husband and wife pair in their 40s, and they generally keep the whole operation running smoothly and drama-free. Hence why it's been my steady clan for the past couple of years. I say generally because there was one quite significant incident involving another clan member that had a significantly negative impact on my life. So, there's this one particular girl that I used to play with quite regularly who had the username K9. Disclaimer, not her exact username. I just don't want her to hear about me telling this story so she can find me again. At first, Kay actually seemed really cool and, judging from her profile picture, pretty cute too. She was exactly the kind of girl I'd have been crushing on back before I was married, but since I was with Lena, All that kind of stuff was totally off the cards. Any relationship we had was entirely platonic. My whole life was going swimmingly for a while, and I was very happy. Right up until my wife decided that she wasn't so happy, and that she was going to file for a divorce. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea she was so unhappy with our marriage, and as much as she insisted it wasn't me, that she had her own issues going on, I still blame myself. Add on to that the fact that she would be seeking full custody of our 3-year-old daughter. I was broken. I sank into this pit of drinking and staying up super late, losing myself in single-player stuff because I just couldn't face interacting with people. I did make an effort to keep the clan updated, like I didn't want them thinking that I died or ghosted or whatever, so I told them about the divorce and how I wasn't feeling so hot. They were super supportive, and I'll always remember that, and they had the presence of mind to give me the time and space that I needed to get myself together again. All but one. K9. Like I said, K was just my type, and I know that there was a slight chemistry between us. But in the aftermath of getting such horrible news, I was in no mood to contemplate dating again, and I knew I wouldn't be getting back on that horse anytime soon. But K didn't see it that way apparently, and over the following weeks, showed herself to be anything but the friend that I needed right now, as she once put it. It started off all innocent, getting my real name off a mutual friend so she could wish me well on Facebook. It was an unexpected intrusion, but not an entirely unwelcome one. She was worried, I got that, so I let her know I was in a bad place, but that I was dealing with it. The conversation was amicable. She sent me a friend request that I had no problem accepting. Then that was that. Or so I thought anyway. What started as a few gentle inquiries quickly turned into something totally overwhelming. After a week or so of getting messages from K9, the tone had gone from kind and understanding to weirdly accusatory. A perfect example of this is when she messaged me something like, "I need to hear more from you. Not hearing from you is only making me feel worse. You need to understand that your actions have an effect on those around you." Now this is like one of the lowest points in my life, and she's sending me messages like that. It didn't just make a depressing situation all the more draining, it actually turned a switch in me, and I started to feel anxious and angry towards her. This is about the time I just started ducking her messages entirely. I didn't need that kind of drama in my life. I had enough on my plate as it was. The next escalation came when my soon-to-be ex-wife called one morning, presumably to talk about some depressingly tedious aspect of our upcoming divorce. Only it wasn't the divorce that had prompted her call. It was something else entirely. She started off the call by asking, "Who in God's name is..." Insert K9's real name. And she sounded livid. I remember just sitting there in shocked silence for a moment, neurons firing in my brain as I pieced it all together in a matter of seconds. Accepting K9's friend request meant that she had access to every one of my Facebook's contacts, a type of privacy I never really thought of previously, which obviously included all my close friends and family, along with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I tried to explain that K was just someone I played CSGO with, some innocent explanation, but I knew what was happening. K had obviously been in touch with my wife, and whatever messages she'd sent had definitely not been friendly. But far from being unfriendly, K's messages had been downright abusive and, from what my wife described, straight up threatening in several places. She said she'd be in touch with the police to file a complaint, but how that wouldn't be necessary if I just kept my freaking mouth shut. So now, not only is K not helping things, she's actively making things worse. And what's more, her behavior is reflecting badly on me too, as my ex's divorce lawyer would most definitely use her messages in any kind of custody battle. So, for the first time in about a week, I reached out to K to ask her to stop what she was doing. It was a well-worded, polite message which I actually redrafted to make it sound as non-confrontational as possible. But still, she took it terribly. She tries calling using that messenger feature, and I won't pick up, and she's just bombarding me with apologies at first, confessing her love and till her mood switched and her tone got decidedly nasty. I don't want to go into too many details about what she said. It was long-winded, drawn out, and thoroughly upsetting. But let's just say a lot of it involved my crumbling marriage and my ability as a father, something that really hit home at the time. I was heartbroken, but I had the wherewithal to do the right thing and just cut Kay out of my life. I block her on Facebook, Discord, and Steam, and foolishly think she's gone for good, and that I can do my grieving in peace and get back to online gaming when I feel good and ready. Literally about a month later, boom, the pandemic happens. I don't mean to make light of a horrible situation, but the whole working from home thing was exactly what I needed. I could do my own work in my own space, and I didn't have to suffer through having to go into public during my post-divorce stubble and hangovers period. Naturally, working from home meant Zoom calls galore. I don't think many people have even heard of Zoom before the pandemic, but now, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't. Just imagine owning stocks in Zoom pre-COVID. You'd be Scrooge McDuck-style rich right now. But anyway, one afternoon I'm in a Zoom meeting with my head of department and a few of my coworkers. There's no real agenda. We're just kind of rambling about a new project we were working on, doing it more for the social contact than anything. It's a chill meeting, but I am psyched about the project. Upper management eyes will be all over it when it's completed, and given it's my brainchild, my name's going to be all over it. When all's said and done, I can be in line for a shift up the company ladder, and you can only imagine what that prospect is doing for my self-esteem and confidence post-divorce. I'm drinking less, I'm focused for the first time in months. You get the idea. So I'm not sure if you know how Zoom works, but unless the host sets a password, pretty much any Zoom user can jump into the call to either participate or in some cases, disrupt it. But this is late April, and the fad of moronic YouTube kids hacking Zoom calls hadn't quite taken off yet, so generally speaking, anyone who jumped into the call was a company employee. A little box pops up stating someone's name. They can then switch their camera on and participate at will. So right in the middle of the Zoom call, same old thing happens. A little box pops up and we think it's like Adam from another branch popping in to talk numbers or something. Only the name isn't anything we recognize. In fact, it's not even a name at all. It's just a series of letters and numbers that has us all like, hi, who just joined? This new user isn't saying or doing anything, but we know they can hear us. I just assume we're waiting for them to load in or switch their webcam on or something. But we're left waiting in an uncomfortable silence for the longest time, and only when my head of department threatened to kick them from the call did they actually stream any video. I didn't recognize who it was at first, but when I did, the sinking feeling of pure dread was indescribable. It was K9, only she didn't quite look how I remembered her. Instead of the cute, bubbly features and shock of blonde hair, Kay looked like she'd lost a ton of weight, and the once glossy long hair had looked thin and greasy. My boss says something like, "I'm sorry, may I ask who just joined?" He's trying to remain polite, but you can see how shocked and creeped out he is by what he's seeing. I mean, Kay looked awful, almost like she was dying. I should have acted quicker. I know that. I should have just manned up and told my boss to kick her, that she was going to cause trouble. But on some level I still cared about Kay, and seeing her in such a bad way was as upsetting as it was morbidly curious and horrifying. "Where you been?" she asked, using my real name. There was no denying it now. "I have missed you so much. I haven't eaten. I haven't slept. I just need to know you're okay." "You know this girl?" one of my coworkers asked, but it was barely a question. It was more like an indictment, like it was saying something must be wrong with me that I'd know a girl like that, and that somehow it was my fault she was in such a state in the first place. "I don't think I have long left," Kay then went on to say, following up with, "I just wanted to say goodbye, but I wanted to show you something before I go." She backs off from the camera a little. At this point, I know that I should have just hung up or screamed something, but we all just couldn't stop staring. And honestly, I felt like I was in some kind of dream. Raising up her arm, we could all see that she had cut 4 letters into her arm. The cuts looked like they were scabbing over, but still looked incredibly painful, swollen, and possibly infected. But despite the grainy webcam footage, we could all clearly see what the letters spelled. My name. Then poof. She's gone. She hangs up. There's a stunned silence for a moment before my boss says something along the lines of, I think you should go check on your friend. Next thing you know, I'm kicked from the call. At this stage, she might have just messed up probably the most important meeting in a long time, but I'm honestly too angry and in some ways worried about her. I jump back into my Facebook account, only it's my turn to dig up as much information on her as I can. I send a message over to a guy that happened to be tagged in a lot of her pictures, asking if he's seen or spoken to Kay in the past couple of days. And this is where things get really weird, because I find out that this guy is actually her boyfriend. Yep, her actual long-term boyfriend of 2 years, who tells me that Kay is fine, and that she looked terrible because she's shooting a short horror movie for a community college course she's taking, one in which she's playing some kind of victim. By that time, I'm just stunned at how manipulative Kay is capable of being. She is willing to take a shot at ruining my career because I won't give her any attention, and she's actually unavailable. I'm so angry that I just think, screw it, and tell her boyfriend about everything she's doing. He legit knew nothing of all the harassment and confessions of love, and actually thanks me and tells me he'll be confronting her about it as soon as she's home from college. I still have her blocked, but I figured I can check in with her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend to see how the whole thing went down. But get this. Next time I talk to the guy, he's in the hospital. Apparently what I told him caused an argument that ended their relationship. Only the next morning, as they're leaving for work, she drives over him in her car. He rode a bike to work in the morning, whereas she drove, and this psycho decides she'd rather kill him than let him go. Guy got his hip and femur crushed and was seriously lucky not to lose his life. Kay is arrested, and a couple of days later, the boyfriend passes information onto the media that she's been taken to a psychiatric hospital after a complete and utter mental breakdown. I told the guy how sorry I was, wished him all the best, and honestly, that's the last time we spoke. An insane story, all true. All that drama, all that fear and suffering and worry because of someone I never even flirted with, never befriended outside of the game, barely even knew what she looked like or even cared. I just enjoyed playing games. It made me realize how crazy and delusional some people in this world are, and how someone online can completely destroy your life. Fortunately, I don't think my wife ever told her divorce lawyer about the messages Kay sent her, and the year after the fact, I get to see my daughter more often than some other divorced dads do, which is, thank God, a huge win for me. But despite all my efforts, I can't seem to quite get Kay out of my head. I'm slow to get back into the dating game, and it's honestly because I'm terrified that I'll meet another girl like her, because I might not survive another girl as possessive, manipulative, or downright evil as K9, either emotionally or physically. Hi, I'm Natalie, and I'm a yoga teacher out here in Portland, Oregon. About this time last year, I had my own studio, a burgeoning list of clients, and a profit margin I was really proud of. But then, the pandemic hit, and business pretty much dropped off overnight. I was going to have to radically rework my business model if my business was going to survive, and for about a week, I was stressing out about what I was going to do. Then it hit me. I was hearing a lot about some video calling app called Zoom in the media and how it was helping businesses continue trading despite strict lockdown conditions. I figured if people could have a management meeting via webcam, I'd be able to teach a yoga class online. I was worried that some of my clients would be slow to warm up to the whole download dog idea. Sorry for the yoga joke, but to my delight, enough people signed up to pay my rent for the month, which was a huge weight off my mind. It took a few sessions for me to really get the hang of it, but after a while, I was hosting 2 sessions a day, 4 days a week, and business was still growing. Then, when I put in an ad on social media, interest exploded. People were trapped inside, bored out of their minds, and were craving some kind of self-improvement. It went from being the worst thing to happen to my business to something resembling the best thing. But having those Zoom yoga classes brought a whole host of problems. Some people lost connection to the call and demanded I Venmo their money back. Other people, setups weren't that great, so I couldn't properly advise them on their form. But the biggest thing, my yoga studio is in a commercial block behind a series of locked doors away from prying eyes. Interruptions and security have never been a problem, but random things were able to interrupt my clients, be it their cats or other, more terrifying things. So I'm running an afternoon session of about 10 to 12 clients and everything is going smoothly. Then suddenly, I start hearing something that kind of sounded like feedback coming from one of my clients' microphones. It steadily got louder and louder until curiosity got a hold of me and I had to ask them what the sound was. My client started looking a little anxious, apologized, then got up while saying she was going to shut a window. Me and these other ladies are watching our screens, listening as the feedback noises cut off when the girl shuts the window. I'm thinking this girl is going to be right back, so I get ready to resume the session again, but then I hear her faintly say something like, "Oh my God, no, 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 no." Then crash. All you hear is the sound of a window breaking, then the girl running across her webcam like a wave from the crashing sound. We're terrified. We have zero clue what's going on, which made it all the scarier. Like I thought it was a home invasion or something. I didn't know that her apartment was actually a couple of floors up, so unless it was like evil Spider-Man or something, but either way, the airwaves are just a mess of worried women anxiously asking this girl if she's okay, what's going on, should someone call the cops, all this panic chatter. Then about a minute goes by and there's even more smashing glass sounds coming from the client's feed. I keep thinking I'm about to see some hooded figure, claw hammer in hand, marching across the webcam towards his prey. But thank God nothing like that ever happened, but even then, what did happen was almost impossible to determine at the time. As I'm watching, I notice that the weird feedback noise is back and much louder this time. Then slowly, it just sort of morphs into a steady barking sound, which is when I realize what it is. It's people chanting something, some 4-syllable phrase, only I can't quite make out what it is. Meanwhile, my besieged client is calling the cops, trying to get someone out to her, while we're all making sure to stay in the call to keep an eye on her. It took us quite a while to get all the details on what actually happened, but when I heard, I was outraged. The girl in question lived in an apartment block in what some would call a gentrified area of Portland. A large protest happened to be going on past her apartment at the time, and it was not one of the peaceful ones. These idiots were throwing rocks at any residents that looked like they might house young professionals. I think they even wrecked a few bars and restaurants in the neighborhood too. My client just so happened to be unlucky enough to have them march past her apartment just as they started feeling mean. I'm very much in favor of most of all the stuff that went down. I voted in favor of it, and I fully support people's right to protest. But I know for a fact that people used all the unrest in Portland this summer to just go out and live out some of their darkest fantasies. Those are the worst kind of people in my mind. I just want to ask those guys, what did my client do? Why was her apartment targeted? She's not a cop or some stormtrooper. What in God's name were they thinking? But yeah, definitely the scariest moment of the summer for me. which is really saying something considering there's been a deadly virus going around. My client wasn't hurt, thank God, but she was left with quite a bill to get her windows replaced, all because some inconsiderate jerks decided to hijack a righteous protest to do some horrible, hateful things. Remember when the quarantine first started and everyone was using Zoom for everything from work meetings to virtual birthday parties? Let me tell you, a lot of people weren't using passwords on their rooms. And if they were, the number of times that it was a 123 or a password was astounding. Point being, I broke into a whole lot of Zoom calls last summer, mostly with hilarious results. I hacked my way into some regional management meeting and told the exec he was fired. I got into what I figured was a remote learning session for a middle school where I successfully pretended to be a kid for like 15 minutes. I also caught some grandpa waiting for a call from a relative and almost convinced the guy that I was his grandson. Guy had to squint at the screen before telling me to go F myself. Okay, it was super obnoxious of me and I know I'm a jerk for doing it. But does it warm the cockles of your heart to know that I got my comeuppance? That I got what I deserve for sticking my dumb head where it didn't belong? I bet you are, even if it's just a little. But let's just see if that changes by the end of this story. So right after I had gotten into some afternoon mothers meeting to give them all the sad little life Jane speech from Come Dine With Me, I figured I'd peaked. There was nowhere to go, no more mountains to climb, so I gave Zoom sniping a rest for a bit until the cravings returned to me later that evening. And the fun thing about Zoom sniping at night was that you occasionally found something a bit saucier than you would in the daytime. For example, I once got into a Zoom call between a few girls having a virtual sleepover in various states of undress. I'm not saying I stayed longer than a few seconds. I'm not that much of a perv, but you get my point. So I'm typing in random words in the search bar to bring up potential sniping targets. I accidentally hit a punctuation mark and happened across a room with a very distinctive name. Most are just called like Andy's Room or Queens Park Regional Subway Managers Meeting, boring stuff like that. But this room didn't even have a name. It just had a series of punctuation that made up a kind of shape, like a kind of curve or wave shape. Usually I had a plan of what I was going to do before I got into a call, a goof or a bit that I had in mind. But that time I didn't. That time I just had this nagging curiosity to see what was going on in it. But you know what they say about curiosity, right? Instant regret. When I loaded into the call and saw what was happening on 2 of the 4 panels, I immediately exited the call. It was like a gut reaction, almost like a physical reaction to being burned by something. Like I legit shouted, "Whoa," and backed up from the keyboard before my hand jumped to the mouse. Then I just sat there kind of dumbstruck, just processing what I'd seen. I don't want to go into what it was. I don't think I have the words or the emotional capacity to go into detail regarding what I saw that night. But put it this way. Imagine the sweetest, most innocent-looking child you've ever seen. Now imagine the worst possible thing you could do to them. The worst thing you could ever possibly conceive of. Whatever it is, you'd rather see it happening to the kid than what I actually saw for real. It absolutely positively fried my brain for about 30 minutes, because that's about how long it took for me to realize I should have called the cops. As much as the concept filled me with dread, I actually set about trying to find the room again. I had to at least try to jot down some details, backgrounds, physical descriptions, anything that I'd be able to hand over to the police to aid them in arresting the scumbags responsible for what I can only describe as ritualistic abuse. I wasn't even sure which piece of punctuation I'd punched in erroneously, but you can bet I tried every single one in my attempt to find that godforsaken room again. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find it. I wasn't even sure what I could do at that point. I didn't think I could just call the police and be like, "I saw some kid getting messed with online, but I have 0 details." But apparently that's exactly what you're supposed to do. From what I found out over the next few days, after talking to a few Greater Manchester police officers, just telling the police what platform you see something dodgy on can help them pin down the people perpetrating the abuse. I didn't mean for this to turn into some internet safety infomercial. There was just so much I didn't know about how the police track down and remove that kind of indecent online material. We hear about stuff like that, and it all seems too abstract, like it's happening someplace else far, far away. But seeing it online like that, hiding in plain sight, it made me realize how kids are suffering like that every single day, all over the world, and we're not doing nearly enough as a society to stop it. But anyway, the point is, just be careful when you're snooping around online. You might just bite off considerably more than you can chew. That, and if you do see something, always report it. It might seem pointless, but just know your actions bring us all one step closer to ridding the world of dangerous predators. Just after noon on Thursday, May 14th of 2020, the 72-year-old Long Island man, Dwight Powers, was participating in a Zoom call with around 20 other people. They were all part of the local chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous and, like millions of other people during the pandemic, were attempting an old system around new and frightening conditions. It wasn't like Dwight to miss a meeting. His long-held sobriety was precious to him, and his own slight technophobia wasn't going to stand in the way of that. Dwight sat at his computer in the small office he put together at his home on Dixon Avenue in Amityville, and warmly chatted with those in attendance before they noticed something moving in the background of Dwight's video feed. To their horror, they saw a figure walk into the room, slowly approaching Dwight from behind. Given that he was concentrating on the conversation unfolding on screen, Dwight was completely unaware that anyone was creeping up on him, and the first he knew of the intruder's presence was when they began viciously beating him about the face and neck. Other users in the call gasped as they saw such a cruel display of violence unfold before their very eyes, inflicted by a man who turned out to be completely naked. When the figure finished hitting Dwight and turned to leave the room, other callers asked if he was okay, but Dwight could barely respond. He was bleeding from a busted lip, and the sheer speed and intensity of the ambush had clearly shaken him. But to his viewers' horror, the attack wasn't over. The figure returned to the room holding something in each of his hands, things that glinted in the light of an overhead lamp, and in full view of almost 20 other Zoom callers, began stabbing Dwight in the back and side, over and over and over again. Those watching could do nothing but call 911 as they watched Dwight gargle blood before falling off of his chair. But even this was a fruitless task, since no one actually knew Dwight's home address. When Dwight fell, his attacker went down with him, plunging the large kitchen knives into Dwight's fallen body in a frenzied and bloody assault, until all people could hear over his computer's microphone were his dying breaths. The callers managed to give a vividly detailed description of Dwight's attacker, thanks to the quality of his computer webcam. But when the police honed in on a man fitting that description, who also happened to have Dwight's blood all over his change of clothes, they discovered something horrifying. That Dwight Powers' murderer was none other than 32-year-old Thomas Scully Powers, Dwight's own son. In a statement given to homicide detectives shortly after his arrest, Thomas Scully Powers admitted stabbing his own father around 20 to 25 times. He told them he returned to the kitchen at one point to change knives because the smaller, cheaper blades kept bending whenever they struck bone, and to fully decapitate his own father in a horrendous, unprovoked attack. Thomas had to use a bread knife to saw through the dense bone and cartilage of his father's spine. Suffolk County District Attorney Tim Seeney said, "This is a shocking and disturbing case. By the defendant's own admission, he brutally stabbed his own father repeatedly until he was certain he was dead. The investigation into this horrific murder is still ongoing, but rest assured we will obtain justice for the victim." Shockingly, When Thomas Scully Powers was charged with murder and appeared before a judge via video link to enter a plea, he insisted he was not guilty by reason of insanity. However, a psychiatric exam showed Thomas to be quite lucid, and in light of this, the judge ordered that he be held at the Riverhead Correctional Facility without bail, and that a maximum sentence of 25 years to life should be handed down should Thomas be found guilty. In the run-up to the trial, Thomas's defense attorney insisted that he would be exploring Mr. Powers' mental health and capacity in relation to this incident. It seemed obvious that they would be playing the insanity card, as I'm sure neither they nor the general public could comprehend any sane reason why a man would just murder his own father out of the blue. The prosecution argued that Thomas had murdered his father when he was completely lucid, owing to the fact that he tried to flee the scene when the cops arrived. He knew what he had done was wrong, and had attempted to hide the evidence of his crime by mopping up the blood and disposing of a bloody bedsheet in a trash bag. On top of that, when the cops arrived at the assisted living facility that Dwight Powers called home, his son tried to escape arrest by jumping out of a second-floor window. Despite being injured in the fall, Thomas ran across a busy highway and into a corner store where he attempted to use Dr. Pepper, of all things, to wash the blood from his clothes. Obviously, he was quickly spotted by the store's owner, who called in the police officers that arrested Thomas shortly afterward. In a statement to local media outlets, Suffolk County Police Department said that although they had yet to determine a motive for the stabbing, they could safely rule out any tensions stemming from father and son being quarantined together. Prosecuting attorneys were also confounded by the killing, saying Thomas had mentioned during his police interview that his father had tried to slit his wrist with a knife, but they had a physical inspection that revealed what they characterized as only a slight mark on Thomas's wrist, and dismissed the claim of self-defense as a flimsy attempt to mask a markedly darker motive. Two neighbors of Dwight Powers, Steve and Mary Englert, said they have been close friends of his family for the majority of the 40 years they'd spent living side by side. They said he was very close to his family, but although he undoubtedly had a lot of love for Thomas, Dwight seldom talked about his wayward son. With a euphemism that seemed to hide something much more sinister, Mary Englert told reporters that Thomas had struggles and would move in with his father during tough stretches. Dwight never hesitated to take Thomas back in, with Steve and Mary testifying that Dwight was a very devoted father. When his sons needed him, he was there, Mary told reporters with a glint of melancholy in her eye. As it turned out, Mary actually grew up with Dwight in the small town of Levittown, New York State, and said that he had been absolutely horrified to hear of her beloved neighbor's untimely death. At first, she simply refused to believe it was true, insisting it must have been some terrible mix-up, although the Englerts had been unable to call over at Dwight's house due to the pandemic. They made a point of calling him on his cell phone to wish him a happy birthday, which had only been a few weeks prior. "How could we have known that was the last time we'd ever talked to him?" Mary said. "It just didn't seem real that he was gone. Dwight loved his family so much. They were everything to him. I just can't imagine why it all happened." By all accounts, Dwight Powers was a stand-up guy. He had served as a rifleman in the United States Marine Corps and had a tour of Vietnam under his belt. When Dwight left the Marines, he got himself a job as a customs agent, opting for a quiet life in the suburbs where he could keep his family safe and happy. Folks said there wasn't a darn chance he had skeletons in his closet. He was just too much of a goof. He was 50 years old when he joined a rock band that played charity shows for children's foundations. Then when he was 60, Dwight grew a passion for the environment and began volunteering with Habitat for Humanity. When he wasn't making the world a better place, he could often be found watching reruns of The Three Stooges, laughing his butt off at wholesome slapstick humor. There have been plenty of suggestions that Dwight wasn't the family man he made himself out to be, and that a dark and sordid history of patriarchal abuse led to Thomas lashing out in some kind of psychotic frenzy. But every attempt to paint Dwight as some kind of abusive, smiling sociopath has either been based on circumstantial evidence or downright lies. But the question remains, Will we ever find concrete evidence or testimony of Dwight's secret abuses? Or was a good man just unlucky enough to have a son who was violently and criminally deranged? Maybe people just want to find a rational excuse as to why a young man would murder his own loving father while completely in the buff. Because there's nothing scarier than the idea that we live in a world where those we shower with love, support, and affection can just snap one day, leaving us choking in a pool of our own blood, with a digital audience just having watched us die. On the morning of August 12, 2020, the young daughter of 32-year-old Maribel Rosado Morales was logging onto her computer for her first day of Zoom classes. Her home state of Florida had been one of the hardest hit by the pandemic, and like many of her Warfield Elementary School classmates, the closure of her school meant she was forced to participate in one of the great educational experiments of our time, one in which millions of children all over the world would be educated remotely using a piece of conference call software called Zoom. This new ad hoc method proved to have its fair share of problems, and scores of teachers reported difficulties in remote education almost immediately. But the teacher that morning must have had no idea what kind of horror she was about to face, a horror she would be unable to hide from young, innocent eyes. Around 8 a.m., the 10-year-old student was taking part in a roll call with around 30 other children when her teacher began to hear something in the background of her audio. It sounded like voices, hushed but strained, and as the minutes passed, the voices coming from the feed of Maribel Morales' daughter grew louder and louder. It got to the point where a full-on argument seemed to be breaking out in the home, and by the time profanity began to be used, the teacher realized that some kind of potentially violent domestic altercation was on hand. Then, the teacher, along with 30 other young children, watched in horror as the young Morales' girl looked off camera, then quickly covered her ears with a terrified look on her face. A series of loud pops could be heard, sounding strange and tinny when picked up by the laptop's cheap microphone. Many of the children asked what they were, but their teacher knew, and she was quick to mute the girls' mics so they couldn't hear what came next. The last the teacher in class saw of Maribel Morales' daughter was just before her screen suddenly went black, as a bullet fired from a 9mm handgun smashed into the computer's motherboard. Police officers responding to the teacher's 911 call arrived at the Morales' residence just minutes later, but they were too late. Lying on the floor, surrounded by screaming, terrified children, Maribel Rosado Morales had been shot to death in front of 4 of her own kids and 2 young cousins by a man who had apparently fled the scene on a stolen bicycle. Just a few hours later, police received a phone call from a city bus driver saying he and his passengers had been taken hostage by a man armed with a pistol. The man had ordered the driver to take him to a destination off of the bus's route and was in the process of subduing and intimidating the bus's many passengers, thus giving him an opportunity to call. He didn't seem to have made any demands, but he was armed and extremely agitated. It was a painfully volatile situation, but by some insane stroke of luck, a police SWAT team happened to be on a training exercise in the general vicinity. Once the bus was cornered, they stormed the vehicle and subdued the hostage-taker without a shot being fired. As he was being cuffed, the hostage-taker made a shocking confession. He told the heavily armed policeman that his name was Donald Williams, and that he had shot and killed his ex-girlfriend just a few hours before. And as it turned out, his ex-girlfriend was none other than 32-year-old Maribel Rosado Morales. Donald was subsequently charged with first-degree murder as well as several other felony charges, including being a convicted felon in possession of a gun. The local sheriff's department said that he would also be charged with armed burglary and armed home invasion, and that there would obviously be additional penalties due to the presence of children during such a horrific killing. In the aftermath, the Florida Department of Children and Families was faced with the heartbreaking task of finding new homes for poor children who had been orphaned during the attack, who were all between the ages of 10 to 17. The shooting rocked the local community, especially given that some of their own children had witnessed a life being taken, all thanks to advances in communications technology. Warfield Elementary and the Martin County School District released a statement saying, "Our deepest sympathies and condolences go out to the victim's family, including children present in the home who were witnesses to this heartbreaking and senseless tragedy. We have our grief team deployed to assist students and staff who will undoubtedly feel the impact of this horrible incident. We stand ready to assist and offer support in any way we can." But no amount of grief counseling will really put a dent into the immense trauma suffered by so many children that morning, not to mention their teacher, who for a few grim moments must have thought that she'd witnessed the death of a child while on the job. And once again, such an incident proves that as much as advancements in technology have the capacity to enrich our lives, allowing us to stay in touch with people we're otherwise unable to see, it also has the capacity to darken them, too. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join a live stream Tuesday, Thursday, and sometimes Sundays. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.